A wedding, a hail of automatic gunfire, and the only one not running, the bride in her white dress charging into the hail of bullets to save a stranger's child. In the smoke and blood, the most powerful man in America stands watching, and for the first time in his life, he can't walk. This story will drag you through betrayal, bloodshed, and a 30-year-old unfulfilled debt. Follow along to the end. Like and comment with the name of the city you're watching so I know how far my story has progressed. The morning of the wedding, Evelyn Carter burned her left hand on the curling iron. She didn't flinch. She'd been awake since 4, sitting on the edge of the hotel bathtub in a robe that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume, staring at the tile grout and trying to locate the feeling she was supposed to have. The joy, the calm certainty, the sense of arrival that every bridal magazine, every weeping mother, every toasting uncle had promised her. She'd been waiting for it the way you wait for a train that never comes, checking the platform, checking her phone, checking the mirror. The woman in the mirror looked fine, hair pinned back, face composed, posture straight, the kind of woman who had done everything correctly for 28 years and expected to be rewarded for it. She set down the curling iron, pressed her burned fingers against the cold porcelain sink, told herself this was normal. Marcus would be across the hall right now in his own suite, probably joking with the groomsmen, probably 3 drinks in. He was always 3 drinks in before noon when he was nervous. It wasn't a problem, he'd said once. It was just how he managed things. She'd accepted that the way she'd accepted most things about Marcus Webb, with a kind of practiced patience, the way you learn to sleep with a window that doesn't quite close all the way. She'd known him since her junior year at Northwestern. He'd sat down at her table in the campus library without asking, opened his laptop and started talking about Faulkner like they were already in the middle of a conversation. She'd found it charming then. Later, she would understand that Marcus Webb didn't ask for things. He moved through the world as though it had already been arranged for his convenience. His family had money the way old buildings have foundations. Invisible, structural, assumed. Their approval of Evelyn had always been conditional in ways no one stated directly. She taught literature at a private academy on the North Shore. She had good posture and read serious books and never said anything embarrassing at dinner. She was acceptable. That was the word she'd caught in a whisper once between Marcus's mother and his aunt, standing near the catering table at a family birthday. Acceptable. 7 years. She'd given Marcus Webb 7 years. She looked at the ring on her finger. A 2-carat cushion cut, platinum band, chosen by his mother with mild input from Evelyn, who'd pointed at 3 options and been gently steered toward the most expensive one. She'd worn it for 8 months. It still didn't feel like hers. Her maid of honor knocked twice and came in without waiting, the way Dana always did, carrying coffee and a look of aggressive cheerfulness that Evelyn recognized as concern wearing a costume. "You're thinking again," Dana said. "I'm always thinking. Today you're not supposed to think. Today you're supposed to feel things and cry and let people take pictures of you crying." Evelyn accepted the coffee. "I burned my hand." Dana looked at the redness on Evelyn's fingers, looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Cold water, and tell me you're okay." "I'm okay." "Say it like you mean it." Evelyn drank the coffee. Outside the hotel window, downtown Chicago was bright and mercilessly clear. One of those October mornings that looked like a painting of autumn rather than the thing itself. The cathedral was 4 blocks north. She could see the top of its limestone tower from here, pale against the blue. "I mean it," she said. Dana watched her for another second, then went to work on her veil. The cathedral was full by 10:30. 300 guests in dark wool and silk, filling pews that had held the city's wealthy for over a century. Marcus's family occupied the first 4 rows on the right, arranged by seniority and wealth with an informality that was actually very precise. His mother, Eleanor Webb, sat at the aisle end of the front row in a cream suit that Evelyn suspected had been chosen to compete with the bride's dress. Eleanor had the expression of a woman attending a business transaction she'd negotiated herself and now had to endure the ceremony of completing. Evelyn's side was smaller. Her mother had died 5 years ago. Her father, Jonathan Carter, had been gone for 12 years. A cardiac event, quiet and fast, the way he'd lived. There were colleagues from the academy, a few friends from graduate school, an aunt from Cincinnati who'd driven up in a Honda and spent the rehearsal dinner visibly overwhelmed by the floral arrangements. She walked herself down the aisle. She'd made that decision months ago and hadn't explained it to anyone who didn't understand it immediately. Dana understood. Marcus had accepted it. Eleanor Webb had called it unconventional, in a voice that meant something harder. The aisle felt longer than it had at rehearsal. The organ filled the space above her, the music pressing down like a warm hand on the top of her skull. And she kept her eyes on the altar, on Marcus standing in his morning coat with his hands clasped and his jaw set, looking handsome the way he always looked handsome, effortfully, consciously, as though beauty were a performance he'd been rehearsing since adolescence. He smiled when he saw her. It was a real smile, she thought, or real enough. She was halfway down the aisle when the first shot rang out. She didn't know it was a shot at first. The sound was wrong, too loud, too flat, too much like something structural giving way, and her brain filed it under something fell before the second burst came, and the windows on the south wall exploded inward in a cascade of glass in October light. Then the screaming started. It happened the way catastrophic things always happen. Not gradually, not cinematically, but all at once, everything at the same time, no sequence to it. The guests were standing, then they were running, then the cathedral was full of smoke and the roar of automatic fire from somewhere outside, and the crash of overturned pews, and someone was screaming a child's name. The organ kept playing for 3 full seconds after the shooting started, some instinct in the organist to keep going, and then it stopped mid-phrase, and the silence where it had been was its own kind of violence. Marcus was gone. She didn't see him leave. One moment he was at the altar, and then there was a crowd of running bodies, and he wasn't in it, and she understood with a clarity that arrived without surprise that he had run. That was the first thing he'd done. He'd run. She stood in the aisle in her white dress with glass on her shoulders and the veil half torn from her hair, and she thought, of course. The smoke was thickening from the south entrance. Someone had thrown a device, not a bomb, something incendiary, producing heat and black rolling clouds that smelled of chemicals and burned rubber. Through the haze she could see the doors at the cathedral's main entrance, the heavy oak panels flung open, people streaming out into the plaza beyond where the shooting was still happening, which meant they were running toward it, which meant the inside was somehow worse. Evelyn moved toward the side exit. It was what you were supposed to do. It was the rational thing. She had one hand on the wall and was navigating by feel through the smoke and the sound of people's panic when she heard it beneath everything else, a child's cough. High and sharp and frightened, coming from her left, from somewhere near the base of the south wall where a section of ornamental stonework had come down. She stopped. Every nerve in her body said, keep moving. Her legs were already angled toward the exit. The smoke was getting worse, and her eyes were streaming, and somewhere outside the gunfire was still going. And the correct, rational, self-preserving thing to do was to keep moving, get out, get clear, and let the authorities handle whatever had happened. She turned left. The stonework had come down in a slab, 3 feet wide, a foot thick, breaking apart into pieces when it hit the marble floor. One piece, roughly the size and weight of a car engine block, had landed on the bottom of a girl's dress, pinning her against the base of the wall. The girl was small, dark-haired, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and she was not screaming. She was very quiet, in fact, which was worse than screaming. She was looking at Evelyn with large, dark eyes that held a particular kind of terror. Not the terror of the noise and the smoke, but something older, something that recognized that the person coming toward her might not stay. "Hey," Evelyn said. She crouched. "Hey, I'm here. What's your name?" The girl's mouth moved. Nothing came out. "Okay. Can you feel your legs?" A nod. Small, careful. "Both of them?" Another nod. Evelyn looked at the stone, looked at the dress. Dark blue velvet, expensive, now ground into the floor. The fabric was caught and bunched beneath the slab, not the leg itself. The leg was pinned by cloth, not weight. That was something. She got her hands under the edge of the stone. It was rougher than she expected, and immediately she could feel the mass of it, more than she could lift cleanly. Her dress was getting in the way. She grabbed the front of her skirt with both hands, bunched it up against her hip, and tried again. Outside, the gunfire changed in character. Fewer sustained bursts, more single shots, the kind of sound that meant the chaos was either resolving or concentrating. Neither option was good. She lifted. The stone came up 3 inches. Enough. She shoved it sideways with her hip and it ground along the floor, and the girl scrambled out from under the slab with a gasp, catching herself on her hands and knees on the marble. Evelyn grabbed her under the arms and pulled her upright. That was when the wall above them cracked. Not the whole wall. A section of the decorative cornice near the top, loosened by whatever had shattered the windows, finally letting go. The pieces came down fast and without warning, and Evelyn pulled the girl against her chest and turned her back to the wall and took the impact across her shoulders and the back of her skull. She didn't go down. Later she would be surprised by that she didn't go down. Her white satin dress was red from the left shoulder across to the center of her back, where a piece of stone had opened a gash she couldn't see and wouldn't feel for another 20 minutes. She held the girl against her and moved, through the side door, out into the October air, which was cold and tasted of cordite, and the girl was shaking against her chest, and Evelyn's heels had broken off somewhere, and she was walking on the stone steps in her stockinged feet. The plaza in front of the cathedral was a war zone, black vehicles at angles, doors hanging open, 3 men on the ground, 2 of them not moving. Police sirens converging from multiple directions, still blocks away. Guests scattered in every direction, some crouching behind the stone planters, some already disappearing into the surrounding streets. A woman in a coral dress was sitting on the steps with blood on her hands, looking at it. A man in a morning coat was on his phone behind a pillar, his voice too controlled for what was happening around him. And across the plaza, standing beside a black SUV with the door open, there was a man watching her. He was tall, dark coat, still in a way that people in crisis situations almost never manage to be still. He was watching the cathedral, watching the doors, and when she came through with the girl pressed against her chest and the blood running down the back of her dress, he went very, very quiet. She registered him the way you register a fixed point when everything around you is moving. Then she moved past him toward the far side of the plaza where a cluster of EMTs were setting up beyond the police barrier, and she didn't look back. She didn't know his name. She wouldn't know it until the next day when she saw his photograph on the front page of every newspaper in the country above a headline that made her stomach drop. But he'd seen her. Shaul. The girl's name was Arya. Evelyn didn't learn that at the scene. At the scene, she handed the girl to a paramedic and watched her get wrapped in a blanket and lifted onto a gurney, and then she sat down on the pavement because her legs decided they were done, and she spent 15 minutes with her head between her knees while a young EMT put pressure on the wound she hadn't known was there. The next 6 hours were the kind of hours that leave a residue. Police interviews, a hospital, more police interviews. Dana arriving at the emergency room with Evelyn's phone and a look of controlled anguish. A detective who kept asking the same questions in different orders as though the answers might change. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, calling once and then not calling again. Marcus himself sent a text at 4 in the afternoon. "Glad you're safe." Family attorney advising no contact for a while. So sorry, so sorry. She stared at it for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling. The wound on her back required 12 stitches and a tetanus shot and a prescription for antibiotics she'd never fill. The doctor told her she was lucky. She nodded. She understood that by the measurable standards of that day, the people who hadn't walked out of the cathedral, she was, in fact, lucky. She filed that understanding away somewhere and didn't examine it closely. Dana stayed through the evening. She sat in the chair by the window and didn't try to make it mean anything, which was what Evelyn needed. Someone else's breathing in the room without an agenda attached to it. The Webbs issued a statement, Dana said around 9 o'clock. She said it carefully, the way you hand someone a thing that might cut them. Tell me. They're expressing condolences for the victims and withdrawing from public events during the investigation. And they said, a pause. They called it a tragedy that their son's private celebration became connected to organized crime activity. Evelyn closed her eyes. They didn't say the wedding. They said private celebration. Right. Evelyn, I know. She knew. She'd known before the statement. She'd known from the text, really, and before the text she'd known from the way he'd disappeared. Not just in the chaos of the shooting, which anyone might have done, but cleanly, absolutely, as though someone had planned the exit in advance, as though part of him had been waiting for a reason large enough to use. 7 years. She was back to zero. The television above the hospital bed was muted, but the images ran on a loop. The cathedral facade, smoke still rising from the south entrance, bodies being covered on the plaza, and, over and over, the image that would define the next 72 hours of her life. A still photograph pulled from a guest's video, grainy and slightly overexposed, showing a woman in a blood-soaked white dress running through the smoke with a child clutched to her chest. Her own face, distorted by motion, barely recognizable. Beneath it, a chyron. Wedding caught in Mafia crossfire. Bride's identity questioned. She read it twice. Then she asked Dana to turn off the TV. The days after were a particular kind of quiet damage. The photograph spread the way photographs do now. Instant, viral, without context or permission, picked up by networks and commentary accounts, and opinion aggregators who needed narrative faster than they needed accuracy. The grainy bride became a symbol, and like all symbols, she was assigned a meaning by the people who found her useful. By Wednesday, 3 separate cable programs had aired segments questioning her connection to the men who died on the plaza. 2 of the dead had been identified as soldiers in an organization called the Crane Syndicate, a criminal network operating out of the upper Midwest, connected to contract violence and trafficking routes through the Great Lakes corridor. The 3rd had been a Valenti family operative, name withheld pending notification. The Valenti name was everywhere by then. Lucien Valenti, 41 years old. Head of the most powerful organized crime operation in North America, built from the ashes of a family empire nearly destroyed in the late 1990s. Reclusive, never convicted, photographed publicly perhaps a dozen times in 15 years. He'd been a guest at the wedding, the report said. Not invited, not seated, simply present in the vicinity, which was how men like Lucien Valenti operated. They existed in the margins of events, close enough to observe, far enough to deny. Nobody mentioned what he'd been doing there. Nobody mentioned Aria. The academy called on Thursday. The headmaster's voice was genuinely regretful, which somehow made it worse. Parental concerns, optics. They would continue paying through the end of the month. He hoped she understood. She said she understood. She went back to her apartment, her own apartment, the one Marcus had been pushing her to give up so they could move into the place in Lincoln Park his parents had bought them as a wedding gift. And she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold and looked at her bookshelves. 12 years of accumulated literature, every annotated copy of every text she'd taught, every novel she'd carried through airports and coffee shops and late nights when she couldn't sleep. Her father had loved books. Jonathan Carter, who'd been a defense attorney before he was anything else, who'd kept a copy of Bleak House on his desk alongside his legal pads, who had possessed a quietness that she'd always associated with genuine strength rather than timidity, the quietness of someone who had seen enough to know what mattered. He'd died when she was 16. She had very few specific memories left, and the ones she had were mostly of his hands, large, careful hands that folded paper into very precise shapes when he was thinking, that held her by the shoulders when he was telling her something important. He'd told her once, when she was maybe 12, that the bravest thing a person could do was act for someone else, when there was no calculation in it, no audience, no reward, no guarantee of safety. You don't think about it, he'd said, you just go. She hadn't thought about it. On the cathedral steps, she'd just gone. She didn't feel brave. She felt tired and broke and unemployed and publicly humiliated, and somewhere in the city was a man named Marcus Webb who had sent her a text that said, "So sorry," and a family that had called her wedding a tragedy and removed her from it like a smudge from glass. Her phone was on the table. It had been ringing since Tuesday. Journalists mostly, plus the detective handling the case, plus Dana, plus her aunt from Cincinnati who'd left 4 voicemails that Evelyn couldn't yet bring herself to listen to. There was also, since Wednesday afternoon, a number she didn't recognize. No voicemails, just calls. 3 of them, each from a different number, each lasting exactly long enough to ring twice. She ignored them. On Friday morning, she woke at 5 and lay in the dark and tried to understand what was left. The job was gone. The relationship was gone. The reputation, the careful, year-by-year constructed reputation of a woman who did everything correctly, was gone, replaced by a grainy photograph that meant different things to different people and accurate things to none of them. What was left was the apartment and the books and the burning in her left hand from the curling iron in 12 stitches she wasn't supposed to get wet. And somewhere across the city, a little girl named Arya, who had looked at her with dark eyes that knew the difference between someone who stays and someone who runs. 8. He came on Saturday. Not personally. Not at first. She answered the door to find 2 men in dark suits standing in her hallway, neither of them police, both of them carrying a particular stillness that she associated with people who spent a lot of time being very careful with their hands. "Ms. Carter," the taller one said, "Mr. Valenti would like to speak with you." She looked at them for a long moment. She was in jeans and a sweater, holding a mug, and she'd slept perhaps 4 hours in the last 3 days, and the bandage on her back was pulling at the stitches when she stood at certain angles. "No," she said. They didn't move. "He's downstairs, in the car. He won't come up without your permission." "Then he can stay downstairs." "Ms. Carter, I heard you." She looked at the taller one, then the shorter one, then the taller one again. "Tell him I don't want money, I don't want protection, and I don't want to be involved in whatever this is. Tell him I did what I did because it was the right thing to do, and that's the end of it." She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it with her back against the wood and her heart going and the coffee mug warm in her hands, and she waited. Footsteps, retreating. The elevator at the end of the hall. Silence. She went to the window. 4 stories down, on the street, a black car was idling at the curb. She watched it for 30 seconds. Then the car pulled away, smooth and quiet, and disappeared around the corner. She stood at the window a long time after it was gone. She didn't feel safe. She didn't feel anything as clean as safe. She felt the way she'd felt standing in the cathedral aisle after the shot started and before she'd turned left, the moment between the choice and the consequence, when you still theoretically could have gone the other way. She'd turned left then. She had a feeling she was about to turn left again, whether she chose to or not. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. She didn't look at it. Outside, the city went on. The October sky was getting dark early now, that deep lake-effect blue that arrived in Chicago like a warning, and somewhere across those streets, in a building she couldn't see, a man she'd never spoken to was sitting with the knowledge of something she didn't yet know, something about her father, about a debt that had been waiting 30 years to be paid, about why a man who controlled the most dangerous organization on the continent had watched her run into the smoke and found himself unable to drive away. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she picked it up. The text was from the same unknown number that had been calling since Wednesday. 5 words, no punctuation, no name. "Your father saved my family." She read it 3 times. The mug slipped in her hands. Not dropped, just slipped, the coffee catching in the lip. And she gripped it back and stood in her quiet apartment with those 5 words on the screen and felt the floor shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the building. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came in under 10 seconds. "You already know." She put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. She stood at the window and looked at the street below, at the place where the black car had been, at the empty curb in the darkening afternoon, and she understood with the particular clarity of someone standing at a door that's already opening that nothing that had happened this week, not the wedding, not the shooting, not the photograph, not the job, not Marcus, none of it was the beginning. The beginning was something her father had done before she was old enough to understand what he was, and it was coming for her now, quiet and inevitable, the way all old debts eventually come. She had a choice, answer or don't. She picked up the phone. She stared at the phone for 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she typed, "How did you know him?" The reply took longer this time. Long enough that she moved away from the window and sat down at the kitchen table and set the phone flat and looked at it the way you look at something that might move on its own. long enough that she got up and refilled the coffee that had gone cold and came back, and the phone was still just sitting there, screen dark. Then it lit up. Not over text. Come downstairs. She almost laughed. She didn't. There was nothing funny about it. But some muscle in her throat contracted the way it does before a laugh, that involuntary response to the absurdity of the situation. Sitting in her apartment in a sweater with stitches in her back. Being summoned downstairs by the head of the American Mafia via text message 5 days after her wedding became a crime scene. She put on her shoes. She didn't know why. She told herself she was just going to the window again, just going to look. But she put on her shoes and her coat, and she went downstairs. The black car was back. Same model, same color, idling in the same spot at the curb, as though it had never left. As though it had simply circled the block for the last 40 minutes waiting for her to change her mind. The rear window came down when she pushed through the building's front door, and the same tall man from earlier was standing at the rear passenger door, which he opened without a word. She stopped on the sidewalk. The air was cold and smelled of exhaust in Lake Michigan. "I'm not getting in," she said. A pause from inside the car. Then a voice she hadn't heard before, low and even, with no particular regional accent. The accent of someone who'd spent decades around many different kinds of people and had absorbed none of them completely. "Then stand there. I'll talk from here." She crossed her arms, looked at the open door, at the darkness inside, at the hand resting on the armrest. A large hand, one ring on the fourth finger, not ostentatious, just present. "My father," she said. "You said he saved your family." "He did. He was a defense attorney. He died 12 years ago." "I know when he died." "Then tell me what you're talking about, specifically." The hand moved, a shift in the interior, a settling, as though the man inside was deciding something about posture. 30 years ago, my mother was going to be killed. 12 men from a rival organization had her location. She was pregnant. My father was already dead. A pause, short and without performance. Jonathan Carter forged documents for her, new identity, new history. He moved her out of the country before the people trying to kill her found the address. Evelyn said nothing. He did it without being asked. He did it without payment, and he told no one. The wind came off the lake, moving down the street between the buildings, cold enough to make her eyes water. She stood in it and listened. "I was 8 years old," Lucien Valenti said. "I don't remember your father. I barely remember that year. What I know is that I grew up because he chose to act, and he chose to act because—" Another pause, shorter. "I don't know why. I never got to ask him." She looked at the open car door, at the hand, at the darkness. "You've known this for how long?" she said. "Since Tuesday." "You didn't know before?" "I knew someone helped her. I didn't know a name. I had people searching for years." Something shifted in his voice. Not quite emotion, more like the factual acknowledgement of emotion, the way a doctor describes pain. "The cathedral attack. My investigators pulled everything on everyone near the building that day. Your name came up attached to footage. My people ran background. The name Carter connected to a sealed case file from 1994. He stopped. "Jonathan Carter, Chicago, defense attorney." She had to work to keep her voice level. "You're telling me my father who died when I was 16, who I thought was just a lawyer who read too much Dickens, you're telling me he wasn't involved with anyone. That's the point." The voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, something she couldn't name. "He had no connection to my world, no obligation, no self-interest. He just—" The pause was longer this time. "He just helped." She stood on the sidewalk and felt her father's hands on her shoulders, large and careful, folding paper into precise shapes when he was thinking. "You don't think about it. You just go." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you did the same thing he did." She held still. "At the cathedral. The girl—" His voice changed on those 2 words. Not much, just a degree of pressure that hadn't been there before. "Arya is my niece, my brother's daughter. Her parents were killed 3 years ago. She is the last." He stopped, restarted. "I put her in the cathedral because I thought it was safe, because I was nearby and I thought the security was sufficient, and I was wrong. The word wrong came out flat and deliberate, the way people say words they don't say easily. You ran toward her when everyone else ran away, including people I was paying. Evelyn said nothing. I don't know how to carry a debt like this, he said. I've been in this business for 20 years. I know how to repay favors. I know how to neutralize obligations. I have never... A stop. Hard. Your family has now saved mine twice without asking for anything, and I don't know what to do with that. The car idled. Steam rose from a grate in the pavement. Down the block, a dog was barking at something behind a fence. I don't want anything from you, Evelyn said. I know. I'm not saying that to be polite. I'm saying it because it's true. I didn't know about my father. I didn't know about any of this. I saw a child stuck under a rock, and I got her out. That's it. I know that too. Then why are we having this conversation? The pause was different this time, longer, and with a quality of weight to it. Because 3 days ago, the Crane Syndicate identified you as a witness. They have people who were on the plaza. They have footage that shows you were close enough to see faces and vehicles before the smoke covered everything. His voice was absolutely level. They're currently debating whether you can identify anyone specifically or whether you're a liability regardless. That debate usually resolves one way. The cold went from outside to inside, fast and complete. I didn't see anything, she said. I was focused on... I didn't see anything useful. That doesn't matter to them. What matters is what you might have seen. What matters is whether you might talk to the federal investigators who have been building a case on the Crane organization for 4 years. He stopped. Are you talking to federal investigators? A detective. Local. That's not the same thing, but it will become the same thing shortly. A sound from inside the car. Not quite a sigh, something more controlled. You should know. As of this morning, you have surveillance on you. 3 men, rotating. Not mine. They've been outside your building since Thursday. She turned and looked at her building's entrance without meaning to. The lobby through the glass doors. The empty street in both directions. Everything looked ordinary. Everything looked exactly like it always looked. I don't... She stopped. Started again. I live here. I teach school. I teach Fitzgerald and Morrison, and I have 12 stitches in my back and my... The word fiancé wouldn't come. I'm not part of this. No, he said. You're not, but you are in it, whether you chose to be or not. She turned back to the car. Her hands were cold. She pressed them together. What are you offering? Nothing you haven't already refused. A pause. Except now the situation has changed. You want to protect me. I want to repay what I owe. To your father and to you. How that looks is your decision. She thought about her apartment upstairs. The books. The coffee going cold. The Academy's careful, regretful voicemail. The photograph of herself running through smoke that was on the front page of papers in 12 states. The text from Marcus that said, "So sorry." If I accept protection from you, she said slowly, I become exactly what they're already calling me on television. Yes. You understand that. You're not going to tell me it'll be fine. It won't be fine. Not immediately. He said it without hesitation. But you'll be alive to deal with the not fine. She stood there for a while longer. A cab went past. A couple walked by on the far side of the street, close together against the cold, not looking at the black car or the woman standing beside it. Ordinary city life, 10 feet away, continuing without her. I need to think, she said. Take tonight. One night. One night, he agreed. Don't go anywhere without... I'm not going anywhere. She looked at the open door one more time. One night. She went back inside. Toktent. She didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her father's photograph, the only one she had framed, taken when she was maybe 5, the 2 of them on the lakefront, and she thought about a man she'd believed she knew and apparently hadn't known at all. Jonathan Carter had been quiet the way deep water is quiet, not empty, just contained. He'd taken cases other attorneys wouldn't touch, defendants who couldn't afford much, clients who called at odd hours, paperwork that sometimes made him stay up until 3 in the morning at the dining room table with his reading glasses pushed up into his graying hair. She'd thought it was professional conscientiousness. She'd been proud of him for it in the uncomplicated way children are proud of parents, not understanding the specific thing, just the general quality of the person. She understood now, or she understood enough. He'd helped a pregnant woman escape from people who wanted to kill her, and he'd done it quietly enough that 30 years later the only surviving trace of it was a sealed case file that nobody had looked at since. He'd carried that secret until he died. He'd never mentioned it to anyone, as far as she could determine. He'd just done it and gone back to his life and his Dickens and his careful hands and his daughter, who was 5 years old and didn't know anything about anything. She put the photograph face down on the table, pressed her palm flat against the back of it. You don't think about it. You just go. She thought about it now. She went back and forth across it for 4 hours. By 3 in the morning, she had an answer, and it wasn't one she liked. But she called the unknown number at 7 the next morning. I have conditions, she said when he picked up. A pause. I'm listening. I don't move. I'm not going to some compound or secured location. I stay in my apartment. Those are my terms. I stay in my apartment. She kept her voice flat and didn't let him interrupt. Your people can be outside. They can't be inside. And if anything changes, if the threat level changes, if something new happens, you tell me directly. Not through the men in suits. Directly. Silence on the line. She waited. Agreed, he said. Second, my name. Whatever resources you have, whatever information your people dig up in the course of whatever they're doing, if there's anything that helps clear my name from this thing, you make it available. The federal investigation will clear. I don't know that, and I can't wait on a federal timeline. My career is gone. The people I worked for have already decided. She stopped. The word she wanted was dignity, but it sounded wrong out loud. Too small for the situation or too large. I need people to know I had nothing to do with what happened at that cathedral. I understand. Third, she looked at the photograph on the table, face down still. You tell me everything about my father, everything you know, everything your investigation found. You don't edit it. This pause was the longest. When he spoke again, something in the quality of his voice was different. Not softer exactly, but less armored. Everything I know, he said. Yes. Then we have an agreement. Do you want it in writing? She almost laughed again. Came closer this time. No. Then I'll send someone. I'll meet you, she said. Not here. Neutral ground. You pick a place that isn't a basement or a warehouse or anything cinematic like that, and I'll come. Another pause. There's a cafe on Walker, the Albright. Do you know it? I'll find it. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, she agreed, and hung up before he could say anything else. The Albright was a corner place, all windows, the kind of cafe where financial district people took meetings they didn't want on calendars. Exposed brick, good coffee, plenty of ambient noise from the street. She arrived 6 minutes early and chose a table that put her back to the wall and gave her sight lines to both entrances, a choice she only recognized as deliberate after she'd made it. He was already there. She recognized him from the plaza. The stillness, the dark coat, the way he occupied space without appearing to demand it. In the photographs from news coverage, he'd always looked like what the headlines called him, powerful, remote, vaguely threatening in the way of large static things. In person, he looked like a man who was tired in ways that sleep didn't fix. There were lines around his eyes that photographs hadn't caught. His hands were on the table, one on either side of a coffee cup, and he watched her cross the room with an expression that had nothing performative in it. No charm offensive, no dominance posturing, just attention. She sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A barista was calling out orders at the counter. Rain had started outside, light and steady, darkening the pavement. You look, he started. Don't, she said. He stopped. Don't tell me I look better or brave or whatever you were about to say. Just start with my father. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not offense, more like recognition. All right, he said. He told her what he knew. He was precise about it. Dates, locations, the sequencing of events in the fall of 1994, when the organization that had been building itself quietly for a generation was hit from 3 directions simultaneously and nearly destroyed. The patriarch of the Valenti family was killed in September. 3 senior figures were eliminated within 2 weeks. His mother, Maria Valenti, had been 6 months pregnant and in possession of enough information about everyone involved to make her a liability to every surviving faction, regardless of which side she'd been on. She contacted 5 different attorneys, Lucienne said. 4 of them turned her down. The 5th took her money and her information directly to the people trying to find her. And my father was... She found him through a client he'd helped years before. Someone from the periphery of things. She called him from a payphone. He turned the coffee cup once in his hands. He met with her once, spent 3 weeks acquiring documents, birth certificate, social security, immigration records for a family that didn't exist. He moved her to Montreal, set her up with a law firm contact who could verify her new identity if anyone looked. He paused. Then he erased his own involvement, sealed the file under a provision that required a court order to access. Nobody looked for 30 years because the people who'd been looking for her gave up after a year. And the people on our side... He stopped, adjusted. The people who should have found her never knew he existed. Evelyn held her coffee cup in both hands and said nothing. My brother was born in Montreal, he said, January 1995. Something crossed his face briefly and was suppressed. He died 3 years ago. His wife died with him. Aria was with the nanny. She was 5. I'm sorry, Evelyn said. He looked at her. The directness of it was startling, but not aggressive, just total, the gaze of someone who had forgotten how to be indirect. You mean that, he said. Of course I mean it. Most people don't when they say it to me. I'm not most people. No, he said quietly. You're not. The rain was heavier now, sheeting down the corner windows, turning the street outside into watercolor. She watched it for a moment. She was aware of the 2 men she'd clocked as his when she'd come in, one near the door, one at the counter. And she was aware that somewhere outside there were probably 3 more, and that the men who were watching her apartment might also be watching this cafe, and that she was sitting across from a man whose name connected directly to approximately 30% of the crime reporting she'd read in the last 72 hours. She was aware of all of it. It didn't make her want to leave. What happened at the cathedral, she said. The Crane Syndicate. What were they actually after? His expression didn't change. Me. Obviously. I mean specifically, why that day, why there? They had intelligence on a meeting I was attending adjacent to the event. The cathedral location was, he paused, collateral selection. They knew I'd be nearby. They decided the chaos of the area created cover. Something hardened in his jaw. They were right about that. And the girl, Aria. She was with my security detail, supposed to be. Supposed to be, she said, but she was inside. She wanted to see the wedding. He said it without elaboration. Then, she's 8. She wanted to see the dress. Evelyn set down her cup. Is she okay? Physically. A pause. She's asking about you. About me? She remembers you. She's been... He stopped. Something in his expression was working against itself. She's been drawing pictures of the lady in the white dress. Evelyn looked at the rain on the windows, looked at her hands, looked back at him. I'd like to see her, she said, if that's appropriate. If she'd like that. He said it immediately before she finished the sentence, and for the first time she saw something uncalculated in his face, something that arrived before the control did. The moment lasted about 3 seconds. Then his phone vibrated on the table, and he looked at it, and his expression closed like a door. There's a problem, he said. She watched him. He read the screen, read it again. Then he looked up at her, and whatever she'd glimpsed was completely gone now, replaced by something she recognized from the first night at the curb. The absolute stillness of a man who managed catastrophe by becoming more still, not less. The 3 men outside your building, he said. 2 of them are gone. Gone. They pulled back this morning. That means they made a decision, she said. She said it because she understood it immediately, the logic of it. If you've decided to move, you remove the observers first, so they can't report the timing. They decided I'm a liability. Within the last few hours, yes. So we need to move you now. She didn't argue, she didn't hesitate, didn't negotiate, didn't reach for the conditions she'd laid out that morning as though they still meant anything, because she understood with the clarity of someone who taught literature for a living that the story had just shifted register. What had been a situation had become a timeline. She stood up, picked up her coat. "Arya," she said. He was already on his feet, phone to his ear, speaking to someone in low-clipped words. He looked at her. "She's secured," he said, "since this morning. I moved her when I saw the surveillance pattern change. She processed this. The fact that he'd known this was coming before she had, that he'd moved the child before calling her, that the sequence of his priorities was visible in that ordering, and found she didn't resent it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe." "That's not a place." "It will be in 20 minutes. He moved toward the door, one hand out slightly, not touching her, not directing her, just indicating the path. "Stay close." They went out into the rain. The street was wet and gray, and the black car was already at the curb with the engine running. And as she ducked into the back seat and the door closed behind her, she thought about her apartment upstairs with the bookshelves and her father's photograph face down on the kitchen table. And all 12 years of annotated literature and the coffee cup she'd left on the counter that morning, still half full, slowly going cold. She'd left without locking the door. She realized that now. She'd been so focused on the meeting, on the conditions and the terms, and the careful architecture of control she'd been trying to build, that she'd walked out and left the door unlocked. It didn't matter. She understood that now too. The door, the apartment, the accumulated objects of a careful life, none of it was going to be the thing that mattered in the hours ahead. What was going to matter was whether the man sitting beside her in the back of this car, whose silence had the particular quality of someone making calculations she couldn't see, was actually capable of what she'd started to believe he might be. The car moved. The rain came down harder. Somewhere behind them, in the apartment she'd left unlocked, her father's photograph was still face down on the table, and the half-full coffee cup was cooling, and the door was open to whoever decided to come through it first. She didn't look back. She looked straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield at the gray city coming apart in the water, and she thought, this is the part where everything changes. And she was right, but not in the way she was expecting, because what she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the man who had ordered her surveillance wasn't operating alone. He was operating under instruction, and the person giving those instructions wasn't in the Crane organization at all. The person giving those instructions had been inside Evelyn's life for 7 years. The car had been moving for 4 minutes when Lucian's phone rang. He looked at the screen and something in his jaw changed. A tightening, barely visible, the kind of physical tell that only exists in people who've spent years controlling every other signal and have one left they don't know about. He answered without putting it on speaker. "Talk," he said. Evelyn watched the city slide past the rain-streaked window. They were heading northwest, she thought, based on the angle of the light and the neighborhood shifting from financial district glass to older brick. She'd spent 7 years in this city and could read it the way she read text. Not every word, but the general meaning of it. The man on Lucien's phone was talking fast. She could hear the shape of the words without the content. Urgent, clipped, information delivered in the shorthand of people who'd worked together long enough to compress everything to its minimum. Lucian said, "How long?" and then, "Who confirmed?" and then nothing for 30 seconds, just listening. And the quality of that listening was different from his regular stillness. This was the stillness of someone receiving something heavy. He ended the call, put the phone on the seat between them. "There's a problem with where we were going," he said. "The safe location. It's been compromised." He said it without inflection, the way you state a fact about weather. "Someone knew we were moving you today." She turned from the window. "How is that possible? You made that decision in the last hour." "Yes." The words sat there. She looked at him. He was looking at the back of the driver's head, and then he looked at her, and she understood from his expression that he was running the same calculation she was. "Someone in your organization," she said. "It's the only answer. Or someone who has access to—" She stopped. The thought arrived before she could prevent it, cold and complete. "Or someone who has access to me." He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She thought about the unknown numbers calling since Wednesday. She thought about the text, "Your father saved my family," and the conversation at the cafe, and the conditions she'd laid out that morning on her phone in her apartment with her unlocked door and her half-full coffee cup, and the conviction that she was managing the situation. She thought about all the people who could have known she'd agreed to meet him today. Dana, her aunt from Cincinnati, the detective, the headmaster who'd called about the job, Marcus. She pressed 2 fingers against her lips and looked out the window again and made herself think clearly. "My phone," she said. "What about it? Has it been... Is it possible someone has been monitoring my calls?" Lucien was quiet for a moment that was 2 moments long. Then he said to the driver, "Pull over." The car stopped on a side street between 2 apartment buildings, engine running. He held his hand out to her, palm up, without explanation. She put her phone in it. He handed it to the man in the passenger seat. Not the driver, the other one, who she'd barely registered until now, younger, narrow-faced, with the focused blankness of someone whose job was entirely technical. The young man took the phone and turned it over twice, then produced something from his jacket. A small device, credit card thin, that he ran along the phone's edges. He said one word, "Clean." Lucien looked at Evelyn. She looked back. "Clean," she said. But the calls," he said. "Someone had access to your call records without physically accessing the device." He turned the phone over once in his hands before returning it to her. "That's a different kind of access." "Marcus's family," she said. "His father sits on 2 telecommunications boards." The silence in the car was complete for a moment. Rain on the roof, the engines idle. "Tell me about Marcus Webb," Lucien said. She'd told herself she was past the point where this particular subject could do anything to her. She'd been wrong. It still had an edge. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but something adjacent to it. The feeling of having been a fool in a very specific and expensive way. 7 years, she said. "We met at Northwestern. He's from old money. His father runs Webb Capital, private equity. They have fingers in a dozen industries." She paused. He's not a bad person. He's just a person who has never had to choose between his comfort and someone else's need. Every time it came up, in small ways throughout 7 years, he chose comfort. I told myself that was just how some people were raised. She looked at her hands. "I was being generous. I was being—" She stopped. "Patient," Lucien said. "Stupid," she said. He didn't correct her. "The question isn't whether he's connected to this," she said slowly, working through it. "The question is whether he's actively—" She couldn't finish it. Because saying it out loud turned it into a real thing, and as long as she didn't say it, it was still just a terrible possibility. "Was he involved in the cathedral event?" Lucien asked. "Direct. Not unkind, just direct." "I don't know. He doesn't— Marcus isn't someone who—" She stopped all the way, pressing both hands flat on her thighs. "He was at the altar. He was there. He left. He left," she agreed. "Before the shooting started or after?" She opened her mouth and closed it. She'd been running that memory for days, trying to establish sequence, the organ, the first sound, the wrong flat crack of it, the windows. And Marcus? "He was there, and then he wasn't," she said. "I don't know the exact—" "Before," said the man in the passenger seat. He said it without turning around. "Footage confirms. He moved toward the side door approximately 40 seconds before the first burst." The car was very quiet. Evelyn looked at the back of the young man's head. "What footage?" "Cathedral security system. 8 cameras. We pulled the archive Tuesday." She looked at Lucien. "You knew," she said. He held her gaze. "I knew he left early. I didn't know what it meant." "What does it mean?" "It means he either got a warning or he got very lucky. He paused. Men like Marcus Webb don't get lucky. They get information. She looked out the window. A woman was walking a dog on the opposite sidewalk, head down against the rain, completely ordinary, completely outside whatever this was. Evelyn watched her until she turned the corner and disappeared. "Where are we going now?" she said. "I'm thinking." "Think faster." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite amusement, more like the recognition of it. "There's a secondary location," he said, "off the original network. It hasn't been used in 2 years, and the address exists in no digital record." He looked at her. "It's not comfortable." "I don't need comfortable," he told the driver. The car moved. The secondary location was a floor of offices above a machine parts warehouse in Bridgeport, accessed through a freight elevator that smelled of grease and cold metal. The windows were painted over from the outside. The furniture was functional and old: a table, chairs, a sofa with a blanket folded on one arm, a kitchen alcove with a working coffee maker, and very little else. There were 4 other people already there when they arrived. 2 men she recognized from the cafe, the one near the door, the one at the counter, and 2 she hadn't seen before. A woman about her own age with short hair and a deliberate way of standing, and an older man in a jacket that had been expensive once and wasn't anymore, seated at the table in front of a laptop. Lucian spoke to the older man in a low voice for 2 minutes while Evelyn stood near the elevator and looked at the space. The woman with short hair was watching her without pretending not to. It wasn't hostile. It was assessment, the kind of look that was gathering information rather than making a judgment. "You're the teacher," the woman said. "I was," Evelyn said. "Elena Marsh," the woman said, not extending her hand, just naming herself. "I run security operations for Valenti. I've been doing it for 11 years. She paused. "I've seen a lot of people in your situation. Most of them spend the first 6 hours trying to wake up from it." "I'm past that." "Yes," Elena said. "I can see that." Something in her expression shifted slightly. Still not warm, but recalibrated. "That's either good or it's a problem." "Why would it be a problem?" "Because the people who skip the panic sometimes skip the caution too. They think they're ready for what's coming, and they're not, because they haven't actually processed the fear yet. The fear is information." Evelyn looked at her. "I processed it 4 days ago. There's been a lot of time to process it." Elena held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and went back to what she'd been doing. Lucien came back across the room. He pulled out a chair at the table and waited for her to sit, which she found strange. Not the gesture itself, but the fact that it was automatic, unthought, the habit of someone whose manners were structural rather than performative. She sat. He sat across from her, opened a folder on the table between them. "Marcus Webb had dinner 3 weeks ago with a man named Daniel Cho," he said. "Cho is an operations consultant. He works independently, but he has a documented history of contract relationships with the Crane Syndicate going back 8 years. She looked at the photograph he placed in front of her. Dark-haired man, mid-40s, unremarkable face, photographed from across a restaurant. Across the table from him, Marcus. She recognized the back of Marcus's head, the particular set of his shoulders, the way he held his fork. She'd seen him sit like that 1,000 times. 3 weeks ago, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. Yes. That's before the cathedral. 2 weeks and 4 days before. She looked at the photograph, at Marcus's shoulders, at the easy posture of a man having dinner. What was discussed, she said. We don't have audio. We have the meeting. That's enough, she said. It came out quiet and very final. She pushed the photograph back toward him. What does that mean for... She stopped, reframed. What does he know about you? About where I am, what I know, what... We're operating on the assumption that he has provided them with your contact information, your daily patterns, and possibly your conversation with me last night. Lucy Xian's voice was level, but she could hear the thing beneath it. Not anger, something colder than anger, something that had already moved past emotion into pure problem-solving. It means the surveillance on your building wasn't passive. It was coordinated with someone who knew your patterns. 7 years of patterns, she said. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The coffee maker in the alcove was running, and the smell of it was painfully ordinary, a smell that belonged to kitchens and mornings and the life she'd had before last Saturday. He sent me a text, she said. After the cathedral. He said so sorry. 3 words and a period. She paused. I thought he was being cowardly. I thought it was just Marcus being Marcus. Unable to face the difficult thing directly, she looked at the table. That text was him checking whether I was going to be a problem. Likely. He wasn't apologizing. He was assessing. Likely. She breathed in and breathed out. The fear was there. Elena had been right about the fear, but it was a cold fear now, not the hot, chaotic kind. It was the kind of fear that sharpens rather than blinds. What do they want from him? She said. What is he getting from this? Lucien looked at the folder. Web Capital has been under regulatory investigation for 14 months. SEC inquiry, potential fraud exposure. A criminal organization that can route money through legitimate structures is extremely valuable to a man facing that kind of scrutiny. He's laundering money for them, or providing infrastructure for it. The distinction matters legally. It doesn't matter practically. She thought about Marcus at the altar, handsome and consciously so, jaw set, hands clasped. She thought about the exit he'd taken while she was still standing in the aisle, 40 seconds before the shooting. She thought about 7 years and acceptable and the apartment in Lincoln Park his parents had bought and the wedding that Eleanor Webb had called a private celebration, as though Evelyn had been a detail in it, a variable, something that could be swapped out without changing the essential thing. She thought about the text. So sorry. Where is he now? She said. His family's residence in Winnetka. He hasn't returned to his apartment in the city since Tuesday. He's scared. He should be. Lucien closed the folder. Ms. Carter. Evelyn. He paused. Evelyn. What I'm about to tell you. His phone went off again. He looked at it, and this time the thing in his jaw was different, sharper, a response to something specific rather than something general. He stood up, crossed to the window that had been painted over and stood with his back to her and spoke for 90 seconds in a voice low enough that she caught single words. Confirm, how many, where exactly, before he turned back. Elena Marsh was already standing. What? Evelyn said. Lucien looked at her, and she understood before he spoke that whatever she'd been bracing for, whatever level of bad she'd been calibrating toward, this was past it. They found this location, he said. You said it was off-network. It is. He was already moving, gesturing to the men near the door, which means the access came through something other than the network. He looked at her. Quick, direct. Your phone was clean, mine was clean. He stopped. How did you get here? Who drove? I came with you, she said. In your car. I've been with you the entire... She stopped. The cafe, the Albright. She'd arrived 6 minutes early. She'd sat down and ordered coffee and checked her phone while she waited, and she'd done something else, something so ordinary and automatic that she'd sent a location pin to Dana. Because Dana had texted asking where she was, and Evelyn had sent a pin from the cafe because that was what they always did, a habit of 4 years of friendship. Here's where I am, automatic and thoughtless, and... My friend, she said. The words were like stones dropping. I sent my location to my friend, from the cafe. No one in the room said anything. She wouldn't, Evelyn started, and then stopped, because the sentence required her to know something she didn't know, required her to be certain about a person she was realizing she'd been certain about without ever testing that certainty. Dana Reyes, who'd been there through every year of Marcus Webb, who'd always had slightly more information about their relationship than Evelyn had consciously shared, who'd always known where to find her, always been available, always... What's her connection to Webb? Elena said. Not cruel, just direct. She knew him from before. They were in the same... They had overlapping social circles before Marcus and I. She stopped. She introduced us. The silence in the room had a specific texture now, not accusatory, Worse than accusatory. Pitying. The silence of people who had seen this particular revelation before and knew what it did to a person. "She introduced you," Elena said. "In the library," Evelyn said. Her voice was very even. She was controlling it the way you control breathing when you're hurt. Deliberately, consciously, one breath at a time. "He sat down at my table. She introduced us." 7 years. Not Marcus placing himself in her path. Marcus being placed there. A table in a college library and a woman she'd trusted completely. Her closest friend. The person who'd held her upright through every difficult year of a relationship that had apparently been constructed from the beginning for a purpose she was only now. "We need to move," Elena said. "This conversation happens later." Evelyn stood up. Her legs worked. She was grateful for that. Lucien was at her side, not touching her, not crowding her, just present at a distance close enough to matter. She looked at him once and found his face carefully neutral, the neutrality of someone giving another person the space to feel something terrible without putting a frame on it. "How long do we have?" she said. "Minutes," Elena said. "Maybe less." "Arya," Evelyn said to Lucian. "Secured. She's not at this location." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She nodded. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She noticed her hands were steady. She didn't know what that meant about her. They went to the freight elevator. 7 people in a steel box that smelled of grease, descending in the kind of silence that has weight to it. Evelyn stood at the back and looked at the painted-over wall of the elevator and thought about Dana sitting in the hospital room chair by the window on the night of the shooting, not trying to make it mean anything, just present, just breathing in the room, and she thought, that was the performance. The not trying was the performance. The person who knows how to be perfectly present when someone is in crisis is the person who has been trained, not by love, but by something colder, to maintain access. 7 years. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened into the warehouse and the cold smell of metal and oil, and from outside, faint, not yet immediate, but there, the sound of vehicles pulling up. Elena said, "Other exit, now." They ran. The other exit was a fire door at the far end of the warehouse, wired with an alarm that Elena disabled with a code entered in under 3 seconds without breaking stride, and then they were in an alley between the warehouse and the building adjacent, rain falling straight down, puddles black and broken underfoot. 2 cars were waiting at the mouth of the alley. Not the black SUVs, different vehicles, older, less identifiable, the kind of cars that were anonymous by design. Evelyn was moving toward the first car when she heard it. Behind them, from inside the warehouse, the sound of the freight elevator descending. Someone had entered through the front. "Go," Lucian said, his hand at her back for 1 second, directional only. She went. She got in the car, and the door closed, and the car was already moving before she'd found the seatbelt, and through the rear window she could see the warehouse door swinging open, a figure emerging into the alley. And then they were around the corner, and the alley was gone, and the rain closed over it. She looked at her hands in her lap. Steady. Still steady, which she no longer believed was a good sign. Steadiness. When everything was falling apart wasn't composure. It was shock's cleaner-looking cousin, and she'd taught enough literature to know that the people who went still in catastrophe were usually the ones the catastrophe was still preparing to hit. She turned in the seat. Through the rear window, rain and street and the ordinary city. No following vehicles. Not yet. "Dana," she said. The word tasted like a wrong note. Lucien was in the car with her. He looked at her. "I need to know exactly how much she knows," Evelyn said. "Everything I've told her this week, every conversation, if they've been..." She stopped. "They know about my father." He went very still. "I told her," Evelyn said. "Last night, after you texted me. I called her because she was who I called. I told her about my father and the sealed file and what you'd said." She felt it then, the first crack in the steadiness, a shudder of something through her chest that wasn't quite a sob, but was its neighbor. "I told her everything." The car moved through the rain. Lucien said nothing for a long moment. What does that change? Evelyn said. What does them knowing about the file change? The file is evidence, he said, of my family's history, of the network that was used to move my mother, of names that connect back to people who are still operating. If they have that, he stopped. They can use it as leverage against the federal investigation, against us. How? By providing it to the wrong parties before we can contextualize it, by making your father's action look like something other than what it was. She absorbed this. Outside, the city was going gray in the afternoon rain, the buildings losing their edges, everything softening into the kind of weather that made Chicago look provisional, like it could be erased and redrawn. She'll have told Marcus, Evelyn said, and Marcus will have told Cho, and Cho will have told whoever in the Crane organization is making decisions. She was thinking out loud now, tracking the chain. They have the location information. They have the file information. They have... She stopped. They had everything. They're not going to wait, she said. They're not debating anymore whether I'm a liability. They know I know about Marcus. They know I know about the connection to Cho. The moment I walk into a federal building and say those names, you become the end of them, Lucien said. Yes. So they come for you before you can talk. Yes. She looked at him. And they come for you at the same time. Because if you're the one protecting me and you're the reason I can access federal channels, then eliminating both of us simultaneously solves every problem they have. She held his gaze. His face was completely controlled, not cold, not unfeeling, but processing at a speed that was visible if you knew how to watch for it. The debt your family owes mine, she said. My father helped your mother because she was in danger and he didn't think about it. He just went. She paused. I need you to do the same thing now. Not because of the debt. Not because of what happened at the cathedral. Because there are people, children, from what you've told me about the Crane Network, who need this to end. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I need you to go to war. The word hung between them, not metaphorical, not rhetorical. The car was moving south and the rain was getting heavier. And somewhere in this city was a woman named Dana Reyes, who had been her friend for years and had been something else for at least as long, and a man named Marcus Webb, who had stood at an altar and left 40 seconds early and sent 3 words in a text, and an organization that had put a price on her head and was now in possession of every advantage. Lucien looked at her for a long time. The car's interior was dim, rain light through the windows, and she could see the exact moment the calculation ended. The slight shift in his posture, something settling, something that had been held in suspension releasing. There's something I need to tell you first, he said, about the federal investigation. He glanced at the driver, then back to her and lowered his voice. The investigator leading the case against Crane, the one who's been building it for 4 years. He stopped. He's been compromised. She stared. Since approximately 18 months ago, he continued, he's been receiving information selectively, guided toward evidence that confirms one version of events while being kept away from evidence that contradicts it. He believes he has a complete picture. He doesn't. Who's been guiding him? Lucien looked at her steadily. Not Crane, he said. Someone who benefits from Crane being dismantled but benefits more from the investigation stopping short of certain names. She felt the floor shift again. That same sensation from her apartment, not physical, tectonic, the sense of standing on something that was rearranging itself beneath her. What names? She said, though she was already afraid she knew. Webb Capital, Lucien said, and 3 related entities. He paused. The federal investigation was never going to reach Marcus Webb. It was designed not to. The man who designed it has been managing that distance for over a year. Who is he? She said. The investigator. His name is Callahan, Lucien said. He contacted your detective 2 days ago. He's requesting to interview you. She sat with this for 30 seconds that felt structural. She felt herself arriving at a place that had no further floor, a place where every institution she might have turned to had already been hollowed from the inside, where the man designated to pursue justice had been made into its obstacle, where the friend who should have been her anchor had been her surveillance, where the man she'd planned to marry had been her delivery mechanism to people who wanted her dead. She had one resource. One. She looked at Lucien Valenti, at the man whose empire she'd been afraid of, whose world she'd been trying to remain outside of, whose protection she'd accepted with conditions that now seemed almost funny in their smallness. And she said the thing she'd been building toward for 3 days without knowing it. "Whatever you need to do," she said, "do it." He looked at her for one long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call, and when the other end connected, he said 4 words in a voice that had no hesitation in it at all. The voice of a man for whom this decision had been made some time ago and was only now being spoken aloud into the world, where it would become permanent and irreversible and real. The 4 words Lucian said into the phone were, "Activate everything, all of it." He said them quietly. That was the thing she remembered afterward. Not a raised voice, not urgency in the conventional sense. Just 4 words delivered in the tone of a man closing a door he'd been holding open for a long time and was finished holding. The person on the other end said something. Lucien said, "Tonight," and hung up. The car kept moving south through the rain. The driver hadn't changed speed or direction through any of it. Evelyn watched the back of his head and understood that this was a man who had been waiting for exactly this order for an unspecified period of time and had simply been driving until it came. "What did you just start?" she said. "The only thing that ends this." "How many people?" "Enough." He looked at her. "I need you to do something that is going to feel wrong." "Tell me." "Callahan, the federal investigator. He contacts your detective today or tomorrow to set up an interview. You agree to it." She looked at him. "You walk into that interview," he said, "and you give him exactly enough to confirm what he already thinks he knows. Marcus Webb, the crane connection, the cathedral. You give him the shape of it without the parts that would lead him to the Webb capital protection. You want me to give him a partial truth. I want you to give him enough truth to occupy him while we move. If he starts pulling on the Webb capital thread before we've secured the evidence that contextualizes it, it disappears. It gets buried at the source, and there's no recovering it." He paused. 3 hours. That's all I need. And if he asks about you, tell him the truth. I'm providing security following the cathedral event due to the connection to my niece. That's technically accurate. Most useful things are. She looked at her hands. I'm not a good liar. You're not lying, you're sequencing. That's a very clean word for it. I know. She thought about her father and his sealed file and the way he'd operated, not with deception but with precision, giving each person only the portion of the truth they needed at the moment they needed it. Maybe that was what she'd inherited without knowing it. Not courage. Sequencing. Okay, she said. He nodded. Then he was on the phone again, and the car was moving, and the rain was still coming down, and whatever had started was already in motion in ways she couldn't see. Callahan called her detective at 4:17 that afternoon. She knew the time because she was sitting across from Elena Marsh in a new location, a townhouse in Pilsen that belonged to no name she recognized, when her detective called her to relay the request. Detective Ewan. She'd liked him during the initial interviews. He was methodical and unhurried, and he looked at her like a person rather than a variable. She'd appreciated that. Federal investigator named Callahan wants to speak with you, Ewan said. He's been building a case against the Crane organization. Says you may have witnessed something at the cathedral that ties into his investigation. When? Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Federal Building on Dearborn. She looked at Elena across the table. Elena made a small gesture, 2 fingers, a subtle nod. I'll be there, Evelyn said. She hung up. Looked at the phone. Looked at Elena. He's going to know something's off, she said. Callahan. He's compromised, which means he's smart enough to have stayed compromised without detection for 18 months. He'll read me. He'll read what you show him, Elena said. Show him the right things. She paused. You've been managing a classroom of teenagers for 7 years. You know how to present information to people who think they're in charge of the room. Evelyn looked at her for a moment. That's surprisingly perceptive. I've been doing this for 11 years, Elena said. I'm occasionally perceptive. She didn't sleep again that night. She lay on the sofa in the townhouse under a blanket that smelled of cedar and listened to the building settle and to the low ongoing sounds of people working in the room adjacent. Voices, keyboards, the occasional low-register exchange that she didn't try to parse. She lay in the dark and thought about Dana. Dana, who'd been her friend before Marcus, who'd been the person she'd called when her mother died, who'd held her in a hospital hallway and said nothing because she'd known there was nothing to say, who'd sat by the window at a hospital after the cathedral and not tried to make it mean anything, all of it real, none of it only that. She thought about the particular cruelty of infiltration, not the dramatic kind, not the spy novel kind, but the mundane, sustained kind, which required a person to be genuinely present with you while simultaneously being somewhere else, to give you real comfort while cataloging your vulnerabilities, to love you in some actual sense while using that love as a tool. She thought about whether Dana had felt the contradiction of it, whether it had cost her anything. She thought it probably had. She thought that made it worse, not better. At 2 a.m, she got up and found the kitchen and made coffee, and Lucien was already there, sitting at the table with a cup and a folder he closed when she came in. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you." She poured coffee, sat down. They sat in the kitchen under the overhead light and didn't talk for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. "Arya," she said finally, "when this is over." "What about her?" She needs stability. Real stability." She turned the cup in her hands. "She shouldn't be in your world? I mean that without judgment. I know," he said. "Do you have a plan for I'm working on it." He looked at the closed folder. "I've been working on it for 3 years, since her parents died." He stopped. "Every plan I make requires first surviving the current situation." "Right. One thing at a time." "One thing at a time," she agreed. They sat there until 4:00. The federal building on Dearborn was everything a federal building was supposed to be. Solid, impersonal, built to project permanence. She went through security at 8:52 and was escorted to a conference room on the 6th floor by a young agent who offered her water twice. Callahan came in at 9 exactly. She'd expected older. He was mid-40s, sandy-haired, with a runner's build and the careful eyes of someone who listened for what wasn't said. He had a legal pad and a pen and no visible recording device, which meant there was one she couldn't see. "Ms. Carter." He sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." "You've had a difficult week." He said it like an observation, not a sympathy. "Yes." He asked methodical questions for 20 minutes. The cathedral. Her position when the shooting started. Who she'd seen, what she'd heard. She answered accurately and carefully, giving him Marcus Webb's name and the detail of the early exit and the dinner meeting with Daniel Cho, which she described as something she'd learned secondhand through sources she declined to name. She watched his face when she said Webb's name, and she watched him not react, which was itself a reaction. The practiced non-response of someone who had heard this name before and had a protocol for receiving it. She gave him the shape. She withheld Webb Capital. She withheld Callahan's own name in the chain, which she'd learned from Lucien at 3 a.m. She kept her voice level and her hands on the table and thought about classroom management, about the art of giving students exactly enough information to believe they were in possession of the whole picture. At the 22-minute mark, Callahan put down his pen. "Ms. Carter," he said, "are you currently under the protection of Lucien Valenti?" Mr. Valenti's security team became involved following the incident due to his niece's connection to the event. "That's not a yes or no. That's an accurate characterization of the situation." He looked at her for a moment, the careful eyes doing their work. "You understand that associating with the Valenti organization exposes you to significant— I understand my exposure," she said. "I also understand that the 3 men who were surveilling my building on behalf of the Crane Syndicate pulled back the morning before someone tried to access 2 of my locations in the same day." She held his gaze. "I needed protection that was available immediately. Mr. Valenti's resources were available." "Convenient," Callahan said. "Very," she agreed. He picked up his pen again. She watched him write something, and she thought, he's going to flag this. He's going to report back to whoever manages his selectivity, and they're going to adjust. She thought, Lucien needs to have already moved by the time that adjustment happens. She looked at the clock on the wall. 9:31. She thought, move faster. At 9:47 across the city at a private airfield in Elmhurst, Two men from the Crane Syndicate's operational command attempted to board a charter flight to Toronto. They were met by 6 members of Lucien Valenti's tactical team who had been in position since 3 in the morning. At 9:52, in a logistics facility on the south side that the Crane Syndicate used to manage what their internal accounting called variable cargo, the loading dock was blocked by 4 vehicles, and the 11 men inside were given a choice that was stated once. At 10:04, Daniel Cho left his apartment on Lake Shore Drive and walked into a very specific kind of morning, the kind where the person he expected to meet at the corner coffee shop was not there, and the people who were there instead had been waiting considerably longer than he had. Evelyn didn't know any of this yet. She was still in the conference room when her phone vibrated in her pocket. The new phone. The one Elena had given her that morning, a number no one who mattered to the wrong side had. She looked at Callahan. "I need a moment," she said. He leaned back. "Take your time." She stepped into the hallway. Read the text from Elena. 3 locations secured. Moving on primary target now. Get clear of the building. She put the phone away, went back into the conference room, picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "I think I've given you everything I can," she said. "If you have further questions, you have my contact through Detective Ewan." Callahan looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes was visible now. She'd pushed something into motion, and he could feel it without knowing what it was. "Miss Carter," he said, "if you know something about the scope of this investigation that—" "I know what I saw at a wedding that didn't happen," she said. "I know what I was told by people trying to frighten me. I know what I've told you." She looked at him steadily. "I hope the investigation goes where it needs to go." She left before he could respond. The primary target was a facility that publicly did not exist. It appeared in no business registry, no property record, no utility account. It was a converted cold storage building in the industrial strip along the Calumet River, accessed by a service road that didn't appear on public maps, owned through 4 layers of shell companies that terminated in a name that meant nothing to anyone outside a very specific accounting department. The Crane Syndicate used it for 2 things. The first was document processing, identity papers, shipping manifests, financial instruments that needed to exist in physical form before they could be destroyed. The second was more straightforward and considerably worse. It was where decisions were finalized about people who had become liabilities. There were 14 men inside when Lucien's teams hit it from 3 directions simultaneously at 10:38 in the morning. Evelyn was in a car 2 miles away. She knew this because Elena had told her. Elena had also told her she was staying in the car, which she'd agreed to, which had lasted approximately 4 minutes after the sound of the first explosion reached them across the flat industrial landscape, a deep concussive thud that the car absorbed as a vibration in the seats and the steering wheel. "That's ours," Elena said from the driver's seat. "How do you know?" "Direction. Theirs would come from the north side. That came from the east." The radio in the car, not a standard radio, something else, something that Elena managed with practiced familiarity, crackled with voices. Compressed, rapid, the shorthand of people in motion. Evelyn listened. She picked out words. "Second floor clear. West corridor. 2 down, not ours. Door breach on 3. "Door breach on 3, she said. "What's on 3? Elena's jaw tightened. "Elena." "That's where they hold people," Elena said. "When they've made a decision." Evelyn was out of the car before she'd completed the thought. Elena came after her, which meant she'd expected it, which meant she'd already positioned the car close enough to the facility that the distance was coverable, which meant, on some level, she'd understood that Evelyn Carter was not a person who stayed in the car. The service road was gravel and wet, and her shoes were wrong for it. She ran anyway, coat open, the cold air hitting her lungs like a flat hand, and the building was ahead of them, gray and low and brutally functional, the kind of building designed to process things without sentiment, and at its north entrance 2 of Lucien's men were positioned with their backs to the door, and they saw Elena and stepped aside without stopping Evelyn. Inside was chaos organized just enough to be navigable. The ground floor was smoke and the aftermath of the breach. 2 doors off their frames, glass from interior windows, men moving in the controlled hurry of people executing a plan. She followed Elena through it and up a stairwell that smelled of cold concrete and something chemical she couldn't identify. The third floor was different. It was quieter. A long corridor with doors on one side, industrial-grade locks, the kind that required both a keypad and a physical key. 3 of the doors were open. 2 men from Lucian's team were in the corridor, and a third was working on a 4th door with equipment she didn't recognize. And at the far end of the corridor, coming out of the door that was already open, was Lucien. He had blood on his left sleeve. Not his, she thought. The angle was wrong, and he was moving without favoring the arm. Behind him came a man she didn't recognize, disheveled and disoriented. And behind that man came a woman. And behind the woman, 2 children. A boy, maybe 10. A girl younger, 7 or 8, wrapped in a jacket several sizes too large that someone had put around her. Evelyn stopped walking. Lucien saw her, and for a second his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. The controlled surface broke briefly, one layer of it, something that was relief and something that was anger, and something that didn't have a clean name moving through it before the control came back. "I told you to stay in the car," he said. "I know," she said. "Elena?" "She moved fast," Elena said, without inflection. The boy was looking at Evelyn. The girl was looking at the floor. Evelyn crouched down, not toward them, not invasive about it, just down to their level, and said quietly, "It's okay. You're out now. Do you understand? You're out." The girl looked up. She had the same kind of eyes Arya had, dark and older than they should have been, eyes that had made a calculation about adults and come to a conclusion that was accurate and devastating. Evelyn held her gaze and didn't look away. "I'm Evelyn," she said. The girl said nothing. Then she put her hand out and took hold of the front of Evelyn's coat, a small fist in the fabric, not pulling, just holding. Evelyn put her hand over it and stayed down. Behind her, Lucien was talking to Elena in a low, rapid voice. She caught fragments. Crane's top command, 2 confirmed locations. Weston isn't here. The name Weston landed with particular weight. She'd heard it before, Lucien using it once in the car. The name of the man who ran the Crane Syndicate's operational hierarchy, the decision-maker, the source. "Where is he?" she asked, still looking at the girl. A pause behind her. "We don't know," Lucien said. She stood up slowly. The girl's fist stayed in her coat for a moment and then released. She turned. "He knew you were coming," she said. "Yes." "How far in advance?" Lucien looked at her steadily. The blood on his sleeve was drying to a dark rust color. "Enough to move." "Which means someone tipped him." "Yes." "After I left the federal building." His expression confirmed it. She thought, Callahan. She thought, 10 minutes, maybe 15. That was all the window had been. And it was enough for a man like Callahan to make one call and for a man like Weston to disappear. "He's not going to stop," she said. "You've taken his facilities and his command structure, but if he's loose..." "He has one more card," Lucien said. She looked at him. "He'll go for what matters most," Lucien said. "When the operation is compromised, you don't run. You take something that forces a trade." She understood it at the same moment he said it. "Arya," she said. He was already on the phone. She watched his face as he listened to the other end, watched the control hold and hold and hold, and then watched something shift. A fundamental thing, the way a foundation shifts, not dramatically, but with a permanence that changes the structure above it. "She's not at the location," he said. His voice was completely flat. "She was moved this morning. The family that was keeping her..." He stopped. "Are they're okay," he said. "They were removed from the premises before. Weston was efficient." He lowered the phone. "He has her." The corridor was very quiet. The 2 children who'd been pulled from the room were being moved toward the stairwell by Elena. The man with the lock equipment had gone. It was just Evelyn and Lucien in the corridor under fluorescent light with the smell of smoke coming up from the floor below. She watched him stand very still and understood that she was watching a man come to the edge of something he'd been maintaining distance from for a long time. Not fear, but the specific gravity of caring about a person more than you'd intended to when the world was designed to punish that caring. "He'll contact you," she said. "Yes." "He wants a trade." You for her. Yes. You can't. I know what I can and can't do. He looked at her and his voice was level, but his eyes were something she hadn't seen in them before, something raw and direct, like a room with the door open that had been closed for a long time. She's 8 years old. She's the only... He stopped, started again. She's what's left of my brother. Evelyn held his gaze. Okay, she said. Then we find her before he can make the call. She looked at the corridor, the open doors, the facility around them. Weston moved her this morning, before the breach. That means he had a location already prepared, already staged. She turned back. Somewhere in this building, someone knows where that location is. One of the 14 people you came in here to find. Lucian looked at her. Which of them is the most afraid right now? She said. He almost said something, stopped. She watched the moment he realized she was right, that the answer to the question was the same as it always was, in crime novels and in real life. Find the person at the edge of their tolerance and let them tell you what they know. There's a man on two, Elena's voice came from the stairwell, controlled and clear. We found him in the office, accounting. He has... A pause. He's talking. They moved. The man on two was 40 years old and had worked in logistics for 12 years and had a daughter of his own, which Evelyn knew because it was in the photographs on his desk, the only personal items in an otherwise stripped workspace. She didn't know his name. He was sitting in a chair with his hands flat on a desk and 3 of Lucien's people in a room that suddenly felt very small. Lucien stood in the doorway. The man looked at him the way people look at things they've been afraid of at a distance and are now afraid of up close, differently, more specifically. There's a child, Lucien said, 8 years old. Tell me where. The man said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, I have a daughter. I know, Lucien said. That's why I'm asking you instead of someone else. Another 4 seconds. The man's hands on the desk were shaking slightly. Not dramatically, just the small tremor of a body managing something large. Weston has a facility, he said. Private, not in the network. He never ran it through our books. He stopped. I only know about it because I processed one transfer, a payment, indirect, 18 months ago, and I followed the chain because that's what I do. He swallowed. Burnham Harbor. There's a boatyard. The facility is underneath it, below the maintenance level. How many people? I don't know. He kept it separate. How many? Lucien said. 6, the man said. Maybe 8. Weston always ran his personal security tight, 6 to 8. Lucien looked at him for a moment. The man held the gaze with visible effort. The photographs on your desk, Lucien said. Take them with you. The man blinked. When you leave this building, Lucien said, take the photographs. The rest doesn't matter. He turned from the doorway. Evelyn followed him into the corridor and down the stairs, and they went out through the east entrance into cold air and the smell of the river, and she was running the numbers. 6 to 8, a boatyard, a below-grade facility, and Weston, who was expecting Lucien to come alone because that was the nature of a trade. He's expecting a negotiation, she said. He's not getting one. He'll have eyes on the approach. Any approach. He'll know the moment? I know. Then how? Lucien stopped walking, turned to her. The afternoon light was flat and gray, and the Calumet River was visible between the buildings, dark and moving. There's one approach he won't be watching, he said, because he doesn't know it exists. She waited. An underground conduit, he said. Maintenance access for the harbor infrastructure. It runs under the boatyard from the east. It comes up inside the maintenance level. He looked at her. It hasn't been used in years. It's not on any map he would have access to. How do you know about it? Because my father used it, he said. In 1991, before everything collapsed. He moved things through that conduit that he needed to move without anyone seeing. He paused. I know because my mother told me. Before she died. She told me everything he'd built and everything he'd used, and I memorized it the way children memorize things when they think they might need them. She thought of a boy in Montreal, learning his dead father's geography like a map to a place he might need to find someday. How many people can go through it, she said. 4, maybe 5? She looked at him. I'm one of them, she said. No. Lucien? No. His voice was flat and final, and she recognized the edge of it. She knows me, Evelyn said. When you find her, when you get to her, she's going to be terrified. She's going to be in a space with people she doesn't know and chaos around her, and she needs... She stopped. She drew pictures of a lady in a white dress. You said that. She held his gaze. Let me be that. The gray afternoon held them both. Somewhere in the distance, the city went on. Traffic, a siren, the low, constant sound of a place that didn't stop for anything. Lucien looked at her for a long time. The blood on his sleeve had dried completely now, rust dark against the dark fabric, and his eyes had that open quality again, the room with the door that had been closed. He said her name, just her name once, and in the way he said it was every calculation he'd run and every conclusion he'd reached, and the specific reluctance of a man who had learned to protect things by keeping them at distance and was being asked to do the opposite. Stay behind me, he said. Yes, she said. If I tell you to stop, you stop. Yes. He held her gaze one more second. Then he turned and walked toward the vehicles, and she followed, and the afternoon closed around them both, and underneath the city somewhere was a tunnel that a dead man had built, and at the end of it was an 8-year-old girl in the dark who was waiting for someone to come. The tunnel entrance was behind a rusted maintenance panel set into the riverbank wall, 40 meters east of the boatyard's perimeter fence. Lucien found it without hesitation, not searching, just walking directly to a specific point along the concrete embankment, as though he'd been here before in some version of his life that existed only in the telling of it. His mother's voice, she supposed. A dead man's geography passed down like inheritance. The panel came away with a sound like a held breath releasing. Behind it, darkness and the smell of standing water and cold stone, and a passage just wide enough for a person moving without hesitation. There were 4 of them. Lucien first, then Evelyn, then 2 men she'd learned to identify by their positioning rather than their names. The one Elena called Reyes, compact and fast, and a larger man, Dowd, who moved with the deliberate economy of someone for whom violence was a professional matter rather than an emotional one. Elena herself had stayed at the facility to manage the perimeter and the communication chain. She'd looked at Evelyn before they left with an expression that contained several things. Assessment, something almost like respect, and something underneath that she didn't name. Come back, Elena had said. Just that. I intend to, Evelyn had said. The tunnel was low and wet, and the flashlights made shadows that moved wrong on the curved walls. Water on the floor, 2 inches of it, cold enough to feel through the soles of her shoes within the first 20 seconds. Her back was aching. The stitches pulling with every forward step, a steady, insistent pain that she breathed through and set aside. Ahead of her, Lucien moved without sound. Behind her, Reyes and Dowd were equally quiet, and the tunnel carried the sound of their collective breathing back to them off the stone ceiling, amplified and intimate. She thought about the man who had built this passage. Not built it. It was infrastructure, older than any of them, but used it, mapped it, trusted it enough to move things through it that couldn't be moved above ground. She thought about Lucien's mother, 6 months pregnant, sitting across from a defense attorney she'd found through a peripheral contact, handing him her life in the form of an honest account of what she knew and what she needed. She thought about Jonathan Carter looking at that woman and making the calculation, not weighing it heavily, not agonizing, just seeing the thing clearly and knowing what it required. You don't think about it, you just go. She just went. The maintenance level of the boatyard was a concrete sublevel beneath the dry dock infrastructure, a long, low space of pipes and junction boxes and the smell of diesel and brine, accessed from the tunnel through a grate that Lucien removed from below with practiced leverage, passing it to Dowd without sound. They came up one at a time into the darkness. Lucien held still for 30 seconds, listening. Evelyn came up beside him and listened too. Above them, through the concrete ceiling, the muffled sound of movement. Footsteps, periodic and irregular. the pattern of men positioned and alert rather than going about ordinary business. She counted 4 distinct sources, possibly 5. Lucien held up 3 fingers and pointed left, 2 and pointed right, then 1, himself, and pointed straight ahead. He looked at Evelyn last. He made a flat palm gesture. Stay. She looked at him. He held her gaze with an expression that said everything a conversation didn't have time for. And then he moved, and Reyes moved left, and Dowd moved right, and she stood in the maintenance-level dark with her back against a pipe housing, and her heart doing something methodical and very loud. She counted seconds. This was what she had. This, and the understanding that staying put was itself a form of action, that sometimes the most functional thing was to be exactly where you'd said you'd be when you'd said you'd be there. She'd made an agreement. She'd stay. She got to 41 before the first sound came from above. Not an explosion. Nothing that clean. A crash, sharp and brief, and then another, and then voices cutting through the concrete, urgent and short, and then a sound that was distinctly a body meeting a hard surface with force. Then silence. Then more movement. Then a child's cry, high and sudden and cut off quickly. Not hurt, she thought, frightened, the cry of someone startled. And she was moving before she'd decided to, up the access stairs at the east end of the maintenance level, 2 at a time, because that sound bypassed every agreement she'd made and went directly to something older and less negotiable. The upper level was a large space, boat cradle infrastructure, dark except for work lights at the far end. She came through the stairwell door and took in the scene in the fragmented way you take in chaos. 2 men on the floor, not moving. Dowd standing over a third with blood on his face that wasn't all his own. Reyes at the far wall, grappling with someone she couldn't see clearly. And in the center of the space, behind an overturned work table, Lucien. He had a man by the collar. The man was older, mid-50s, compact, with the face of someone who had given orders for so long that receiving them had become physically intolerable. She knew the face from photographs Lucien's people had shown her in the car. Weston, the man who ran the Crane Syndicate's operations, the man who had decided she was a liability, the man who had taken Aria. And against the wall to Weston's left, zip-tied to a pipe with her knees pulled to her chest and her dark eyes enormous in the work-light glare, was Aria. The girl saw Evelyn. Her mouth opened. "Evelyn?" Aria said. Not a scream. Her name, said clearly, in the voice of a child who had been holding very still in the dark and waiting for something recognizable to arrive. Weston's head snapped toward the sound. In the fraction of a second his attention shifted, Lucien moved, one controlled, final motion, a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment of distraction, and Weston went down hard. And stayed. Evelyn was already crossing the floor. She got to Aria and dropped to her knees on the concrete, which was going to hurt tomorrow in ways she couldn't afford to think about now. And she got her hands on the zip ties and looked at them and looked around for something, anything. And Reyes was there in 3 seconds with a blade, cutting through the plastic, and Aria's arms came free, and she pitched forward and Evelyn caught her. The girl weighed almost nothing, or felt that way. The specific weightlessness of someone who has been bracing against themselves for hours and is suddenly allowed to stop. She pressed her face against Evelyn's shoulder and made no sound, not crying, just breathing. Big, ragged breaths that she was clearly trying to control and couldn't quite, each one shaking through her small body and dissipating into the next one. Evelyn held her, put her hand on the back of her head, said nothing because there was nothing to say that was the right size for the moment. She just held her and breathed and let the girl feel the solid reality of it. Someone here, arms around her, not going anywhere. Lucien was there when she looked up. He was crouched beside them both, one hand on Aria's shoulder, careful, light, the touch of a man who had not touched this child enough, and knew it, and was reckoning with it in real time. Aria turned her head from Evelyn's shoulder without fully leaving it and looked at Lucien. "You came," she said. His jaw moved. He said, "I came." "I knew you would," she said, and then quietly, in a voice that contained 8 years of a very specific kind of knowledge, "I wasn't sure, but I knew." The distinction between those two things, the not sure and the knowing, sat in the air for a moment. Evelyn felt Lucien absorb it, watched something in him that had been armored for a very long time take a direct hit from 8 words said by an 8-year-old. He put his arm around the girl from the other side, and they stayed like that on the concrete floor of a boatyard under work lights while Reyes and Dowd secured the room around them. And nobody said anything for a while because the thing that had just ended was too large for immediate language. Weston didn't die. That was the complication and also, in its way, the point. He was conscious and mobile when Dowd pulled him upright, and he had the particular expression of a man who has lost but hasn't finished. That specific dangerous combination of calculation and fury that meant whatever came next was going to require management. "You've destroyed your own protection," he said to Lucien. His voice was level. He was bleeding from his right temple and didn't appear to notice. "Every arrangement you had, every treaty, every mutual interest, you burned it. For what?" He looked at Evelyn. "For a schoolteacher." Lucien looked at him for a moment. "Take him," he said to Reyes. "You have nothing left," Weston said. The federal case, Lucien said, is about to have significantly more evidence than it did this morning." He looked at Weston steadily, "including a full accounting of the relationship between the Crane Syndicate and Webb Capital, and the specific individuals who have been managing the investigation's blind spots for 18 months, he paused, "including Callahan." Weston went very still. "I've been building that file for 3 years, Lucien said. I was waiting for the right moment to make it useful." He looked at the man without heat, without satisfaction, just with the flat factual regard of someone who has already made every decision that matters. "This is that moment." "You'll go down with it," Weston said. "Everything connects. You can't—" "I know what connects," Lucien said. "I've spent 20 years knowing exactly what connects and exactly how to sequence it." He turned away. "We're done here." They moved Arya out first. Evelyn carried her up the maintenance stairs and through the tunnel. The girl had protested once that she could walk, and Evelyn had said, "I know," and kept carrying her. And Arya had accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who had learned when to spend energy and when not to. The tunnel was different going back. The same water, the same cold stone, the same curved ceiling returning their breathing to them, but the weight of it was different, not heavier but more present, as though she could now feel the full substance of what she was moving through. She thought about Dana on the walk back through the dark. Not bitterly, not yet. That would come later, in the quiet, in all the quiet hours of reassembling what the past 7 years actually were. But she thought about her, and the thinking was the first stage of the kind of grief that isn't about death, but about revision. The long work of going back through a relationship and understanding which parts were real and which parts were architecture built around a purpose she hadn't known. Some of it had been real. She was almost certain of that. That was the part that would take the longest. The arrests happened over the following 72 hours. Not all at once. These things never happened all at once, despite what films suggested. They happened the way floods happen, a threshold reached, then water finding every available channel simultaneously. Daniel Cho was first, processed on the morning of the second day with a federal warrant that bore the signature of an investigator who was not Callahan. Callahan himself was placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs inquiry before noon on the same day, the specifics of which had been provided to the relevant oversight body by a source whose name appeared nowhere in the documentation but whose fingerprints were, in the most metaphorical sense, on every page. Marcus Webb was contacted by federal agents on the afternoon of the second day at the family residence in Winnetka. She knew this because Detective Yuen called her. He said it carefully, giving her the information without editorializing, which she appreciated. "I thought you should know," he said. "Thank you," she said. A pause on the line. "Ms. Carter, I want to say, for what it's worth, from where I've been sitting on this, you didn't do anything wrong." She held the phone and looked at the wall of the townhouse room she'd been given, which had a window that faced a small yard, still dead from winter, the ground hard and pale. "I know," she said, and then, "Thank you. That matters." She didn't hear from Marcus. She'd stopped expecting to. Dana was a more complicated piece. She'd disappeared from her apartment on the day of the Bridgeport breach. Phone dead, no forwarding, the particular clean absence of someone who had a contingency and had used it. Federal investigators had her name. Whether they'd find her was a question that lived in the open for now, unresolved, one of the few threads that didn't tie. Evelyn thought about this at intervals over the following days and found that what she felt wasn't the rage she'd expected. It was something quieter and more durable, a kind of mourning for a version of things that had never existed, and alongside it, stranger, harder to categorize, a faint and unwanted understanding. Dana had been doing what she'd been doing for reasons that had started before Evelyn and would continue after her. That wasn't absolution. It was just the truth of the thing, flat and without drama. She put it away. She kept taking it out. She put it away again. On the fourth day after the boatyard, Lucien came to where she was staying with a folder and 2 cups of coffee from a place down the street, and he sat across from her at the small table and put the folder down and didn't open it. "The federal file," he said. "The full version. My legal team has been in contact with the correct investigators, not Callahan's successor, the one above that. And the documentary evidence of the Crane-Webb connection is now part of the official record." "My father's file," she said, "remained sealed. It was referenced internally as evidence of a prior protective action. No details, no names exposed." He paused. "It serves the case better as a sealed record than an open one. It establishes the debt without opening the methodology." She nodded. "And my name?" "The district attorney's office issued a statement this morning." He pushed a printed page across the table. "Cleared of any association with the cathedral attack, characterized as..." He paused. "A civilian who demonstrated significant personal courage in the protection of a minor during the incident." She read it again, set it down. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Smaller than I expected," she said. "I thought I wanted it more than this. You wanted the version of it that undid everything. That's different." "Yes." She looked at the table. "The academy called yesterday, the headmaster. He wanted to offer..." "Are you going back?" She looked at the dead yard through the window. "No," she said. It came out certain, which surprised her. She hadn't known she was certain until the word was out. "No, I don't want to go back to managing other people's children through books about other people's lives." She stopped. "That sounds harsher than I mean it. It sounds honest. I want..." She stopped again. Started differently. "There are children in this city who are in the position Arya was in, who are in the position those kids in the Calumet facility were in, who are in the middle of things they didn't choose and can't exit, and the system that's supposed to help them is either compromised or insufficient or both." She looked at him. "I want to do something about that, specifically, with resources and with structure, not just with intention." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light from the window was the first real light she'd seen in days, pale but present, the specific light of late October giving way to something that might eventually become November. "I have resources," he said. "I know you do. And there are things that need to be restructured, redirected." He turned the coffee cup once. "The organization as it currently exists cannot continue. I've known that for 3 years. I've been finding reasons to delay the knowing." He paused. "There are legitimate enterprises embedded in it. Security, logistics, international transport infrastructure. Those can be separated, built into something that operates in the light." "That's not a small thing," she said. "No. That's years of work." "Yes." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He looked back at her with the same directness he'd had from the beginning, that specific quality of attention, fully present, without performance. "Because I've been thinking about what you said in the car, about doing the right thing without calculation." He paused. "I've spent 20 years calculating everything, every alliance, every exposure, every risk and return." He stopped. "I want to try something different." The yard outside was very still. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a car started and drove away, and the silence that replaced it was the ordinary silence of a city morning, unremarkable and continuous. "Arya," she said, "she's asking when she can see you." "I'd like that to be soon." "Tomorrow," he said, "if you're willing." "Yes?" He nodded. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. They sat in the quiet of the morning and drank coffee and didn't fill the silence with anything, which was its own kind of statement, the kind made by two people who had been through enough together in a very short time that the ordinary quiet between them had already become its own language. She saw Arya the next morning. The girl was staying with Elena, a temporary arrangement that had already lasted 4 days and showed signs of becoming less temporary, which was its own interesting development. Elena's apartment was orderly and spare, and had a dog that Arya had immediately taken ownership of in the way that children and animals reach agreements that adults can't quite replicate. When Evelyn came through the door, Arya was on the floor with the dog, and a collection of drawings spread around her. Paper covered in colored marker, scenes from a specific story. A woman in a white dress recurring through all of them like a signature. She looked up when Evelyn came in. She didn't run to her. She did something more considered. She stood up, set down the marker she'd been holding, and crossed the room at a child's version of dignified, and put her arms around Evelyn's waist and pressed her face against her sternum and stayed there. Evelyn held her. "I drew you," Arya said, her voice muffled. "I see that," Evelyn said. "The dress is wrong. I didn't know how the back part went. The dress was ruined anyway." Arya looked up at her. "Were you scared? At the wedding place?" Evelyn thought about it. "Yes." "But you came anyway." "Yes." The girl absorbed this. "My dad used to say that brave and scared are the same thing," she said. "He said people just say brave when they don't see the scared part." Evelyn looked at her, looked at the dark eyes that were Lucien's eyes and her dead father's eyes, and the eyes of every person who had understood something essential at cost. "Your dad was right," she said. Arya nodded. "I know," she said, with the absolute matter-of-fact certainty of a child whose father has been gone long enough that his words have become fact rather than memory. "He was usually right." She went back to her drawings. Evelyn sat on the floor and looked at them. All those white dresses, the smoke rendered in gray and brown, the small figure of a girl in the arms of someone larger, the recurring image, the thing Arya had needed to draw over and over in order to hold it still enough to live with. She thought about her own recurring image, the stone slab, the dress, the choice point. She thought about all the ways it had already redrawn her life. Not destroyed it, redrawn it, the way a flood doesn't erase a landscape but changes its shape permanently, removes certain features and reveals others. She picked up a marker. Arya handed her a blank page without being asked. She drew something. Not well, she hadn't drawn anything since childhood, but she drew the lake and a figure standing at the edge of it, and beside the figure she drew a smaller one, and she gave them both the same posture, upright, facing forward, looking at the same horizon. Arya looked at it for a moment. "That's us," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "What are we looking at?" "I'm not sure yet," Evelyn said. "That's the good part." The Carter Initiative was incorporated 4 months later, in February, named not by Lucien or by Evelyn, but by Arya, who had heard the name once in passing and declared it correct in the absolute way that 8-year-olds declare things. The office space was in a building on Michigan Avenue, not large, not ostentatious, with windows that faced the lake, and a conference table that had already accumulated the kind of minor damage that meant it was being used. Evelyn ran it. 2 attorneys, one of whom she'd found through Ewan, and one through a contact at Northwestern she'd called on a cold morning in November when she was building the board list and found she needed someone who understood the intersection of criminal justice exposure and family courts. Lucien's financial backing was structured through a legitimate foundation that his legal team had spent 8 weeks building from the ground up. Traceable, transparent, auditable, the explicit opposite of everything his organization had been. He'd insisted on that. She'd insisted on it too, and the fact that they'd arrived at the same place from different directions had told her something she'd already been suspecting. He was present without being the center of it. That was how she'd describe it later when people asked, He was present. He came to board meetings and said less than anyone expected and more than anyone else prepared for. He had a talent for sitting in a room full of professionals talking about policy and legal frameworks and cutting to the thing underneath all the language, the actual human problem, and naming it plainly in a way that moved the room without him appearing to try. She thought sometimes about what her father would have made of him. She thought about it without resolution and found she could live with the irresolution, which was itself a kind of answer. The charges against Marcus Webb were filed in March: conspiracy, financial fraud, material assistance to a criminal organization. He entered a not guilty plea through attorneys who billed at the kind of hourly rate that requires a family fund to sustain, and the case moved into the long administrative pace of federal proceedings, where it would live for a year or two before resolving in the way these things always eventually resolved. She didn't follow it closely. She had other things to follow. Callahan resigned before the internal affairs process completed. No charges were filed. The evidence was sufficient for administrative action and insufficient for criminal prosecution, which was itself a kind of justice, the imperfect kind that was still better than none. She thought about him occasionally with a complicated mixture of feelings that she didn't try to simplify. He'd made choices over 18 months that had cost people real things. He'd also spent 4 years building a case on the right target for reasons that had started as legitimate. People were rarely one thing. She'd taught literature long enough to know that. Dana was found in April. She was in Vancouver, not hiding exactly, using her own name, working at a restaurant, as though she'd decided that the best camouflage was ordinary life. The federal warrant brought her back. Evelyn didn't attend the processing, but she received a call from Ewan that afternoon. "She asked about you," Ewan said. A pause. "What did she ask?" Evelyn said. "Whether you were okay." She stood at the window of the initiative's office and looked at the lake, which was the specific blue-gray of April on Lake Michigan, which was different from every other month's version of that color. "Tell her yes," she said. Then, "Tell her I hope she is too." She meant both things. She'd spent 3 months finding out that she meant both things simultaneously, which was harder than only meaning one of them would have been, and also more accurate, and she'd decided to hold with accuracy when it was available. On a Saturday in May, Evelyn Carter stood on the shore of Lake Michigan in the early morning with her shoes off and her feet on the cold sand and the lake going out to the horizon in front of her, green and restless and enormous. Behind her, up the path toward the parking area, Arya was throwing sticks for Elena's dog, who had become, definitively, Arya's dog, a fact that Elena had accepted with the expression of someone who had planned to resist a thing and discovered they no longer wanted to. Lucien was sitting on a bench above the beach with a coffee cup and his phone, and the particular stillness that she'd come to read differently than she had at the beginning. Not the stillness of control, or not only that, but the stillness of someone who had finally found a form of attention that didn't require constant management of everything within range. He was watching Arya. She watched him watch her, from a distance, and thought about the boy in Montreal who had memorized his dead father's tunnels. About the man who had built a 20-year empire out of the ashes of a family that had been almost erased. About the specific cost of survival, when survival is all you're doing. How it consumes the thing it's supposed to protect. How the mechanisms built to preserve a life can become the structure that prevents the life from happening. She thought about her father, who had sealed a file and said nothing and gone back to his books, and his careful hands, and his daughter, who was 5 years old and knew nothing. She thought about the kind of person who could do that, act significantly, and then simply resume being ordinary, not from cowardice, but from the understanding that the act was complete in itself and required no audience. She thought, I am more like him than I knew. The lake moved against the shore in the rhythm it had always had, indifferent and continuous. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of May morning that felt like an argument against everything winter had claimed. She heard footsteps on the sand behind her. She didn't turn. Lucien stood beside her. He handed her a coffee cup. Not his, a second one, which meant he'd planned to bring it down to her, which meant he'd been watching her from the bench and deciding to come. She took it. They stood together at the edge of the water, looking at the horizon where the lake met the sky in a line that was slightly blurred by morning haze. She needs stability, Evelyn said. Arya, Long term, not Elena's couch. I know. I've been looking at programs, educational, therapeutic. There's one in Evanston that's specifically designed for. I enrolled her last week, he said. She looked at him. You did? She starts in September. He looked at the water. I spoke with the director, explained the situation in generalized terms. A pause. She's going to be okay. She's going to be better than okay, Evelyn said. She's going to be extraordinary. I know that too. She looked at the lake. He looked at the lake. Behind them, Arya laughed at something the dog had done. A clear, sudden, uncomplicated laugh, the kind that children produce when they've temporarily forgotten to be careful. And the sound of it moved through Evelyn like light through water, refracted and warm. The initiative, she said, the Webb capital case. When it resolves, there will be asset recovery that the courts will need to direct. I've been in conversation with the DA's office about designating a portion. Done, he said. She looked at him. I hadn't finished. I know what you were going to say. He turned to look at her, and his face in the morning light had the open quality, the room with the door that had first appeared in the corridor of the crane facility, that she'd been seeing more and more of since, that she suspected he wasn't trying to close anymore. I spoke to the DA's office 2 days ago. They agreed. She held his gaze. You keep doing that. Doing what? Getting to the answer before I finish the question. You think slowly, he said. I think carefully, she said. There's a difference. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. The expression she'd been cataloging since the Albright Cafe. Not quite amusement, more than recognition. The expression of a man encountering something that consistently surprised him and had decided to stop being surprised by the surprise. Yes, he said. There is. The water came in and pulled back, came in again. The morning was fully present around them. The cold and the light and the smell of the lake and the sound of the dog and the child behind them on the path. She thought about the wedding that hadn't happened. She thought about the curling iron burn on her left hand, healed now to a small pale mark she'd probably carry for years. She thought about the aisle and the smoke and the wrong flat sound, and the choice she'd made without thinking, turning left toward a small girl under a piece of stone. She thought about her father folding paper at the dining room table at 3 a.m, careful hands making precise shapes, doing the quiet work that no one would see. She thought, this is what it looks like. The thing he was talking about. This is it. Not the resolution of everything, not the arrival at safety or certainty or the life she'd planned, but this, standing on cold sand at the edge of a lake in May with a coffee cup and a complicated history and a child's laughter coming from up the path, and the particular quality of company beside her, earned, difficult, strange, real. She had not planned any of this. She had turned left. She had just gone. The lake went on to the horizon. The morning held. Behind them, Arya called her name. Evelyn! The way children call names when they want to show you something, urgent and bright and completely present. The voice of someone who has decided that the person they're calling is the person they call. She turned from the water. She walked back up the beach toward the girl who was holding up a stone she'd found, dark and smooth, water-polished, presenting it with both hands like something worth seeing. She took it, turned it over. It was a good stone, dense and cool in her palm, unremarkable to anyone who wasn't holding it. It's perfect, she said. Arya smiled, satisfied, and went back to the dog. Evelyn closed her hand around the stone and stood in the May morning on the shore of Lake Michigan, and the city went on around her in all its ordinary motion, and somewhere in the ongoing life of it, in the initiative's office, and the federal case files, and the restructured company, and the school in Evanston, and the sealed record of a quiet man who had helped a stranger 30 years ago. Something that had been broken was not fixed exactly, but was being built into a different shape. Not the life she'd planned. Something harder and more specific, and entirely hers. She kept the stone.